The lake was gone before sunrise, and the screaming started 5 minutes later. I heard it through my kitchen window while pouring coffee into an old metal thermos stained from years of fishing trips and early mornings beside the water. At first, I thought somebody crashed a golf cart near the shoreline again. That happened more often than the Silver Creek HOA liked admitting publicly. But then came another scream. Louder this time. Panicked. Followed by the sound of dozens of voices echoing across wet mud where 30 feet of lake water used to be. I stepped onto my back porch just as dawn light started breaking across the valley, and for the first time in almost 20 years, the entire reservoir floor sat exposed beneath cold, gray morning fog. Thousands of cracked mud lines stretched across the empty basin like scars while stranded luxury docks leaned sideways against wooden posts buried deep in wet clay. Expensive pontoon boats rested crooked in the mud with their hulls tilted at awkward angles. Decorative fountains near the HOA boardwalk sputtered uselessly into empty air. And right in the center of it all stood Vanessa Whitmore, wearing a white trench coat and high heels completely unsuited for standing in 6 inches of shoreline sludge. Even from 200 yards away, I could tell she was losing her mind. The smell hit next. Wet earth. Rotten algae. Fresh mud exposed after years underwater. Anybody who grew up around reservoirs knows that smell immediately. It means hidden ground is breathing again. County event tents lined the eastern shoreline where the HOA planned their big grand opening ceremony later that morning. Silver Creek Estates had spent 6 months advertising the lake as the centerpiece of their new luxury waterfront expansion project. Private boating access. Premium shoreline living. Exclusive lakefront community experience. Funny wording considering the HOA never actually owned the lake itself. They only owned the illusion wrapped around it. By 6 o'clock, county guests started arriving while workers scrambled around the empty basin dragging extension cords and folding chairs through mud. Expensive black SUVs parked beside decorative stone entry signs while confused investors stepped out staring at what looked less like a luxury waterfront and more like a drained construction pit after a storm. Vanessa kept pacing near the boardwalk, holding her phone against one ear while yelling at somebody loudly enough for half the shoreline to hear. The water cannot just disappear overnight, she snapped. Actually, it could, especially when somebody understood exactly how the flood control system beneath Silver Creek worked. I stood quietly on my porch sipping coffee while cold morning air rolled across the valley carrying sounds of panic from the shoreline below. The metal wind chime Claire bought me years ago rattled softly beside the cabin while fog drifted low across exposed mud flats where base boats floated yesterday afternoon. Nobody looked toward my property. That was the funny part. All those luxury homes stacked along the ridge overlooking the reservoir. And not one person realized the old man living beside the maintenance road understood the lake better than every HOA board member combined. Vanessa Whitmore hated my cabin almost immediately after moving into Silver Creek 3 years earlier. According to her, my property compromised the visual consistency of the luxury shoreline district. She hated the rusted floodgate warning signs near my fence line too. Said they looked industrial. Embarrassing. She spent months pressuring the HOA to hide them behind landscaping stone and decorative fencing before county guests arrived for the waterfront expansion launch. Eventually, the signs disappeared entirely. Big mistake. Those signs existed for a reason. I built half that flood control system myself back in the late 1990s when the county converted the valley into a managed retention reservoir after 3 straight years of seasonal flooding destroyed nearby farmland. Back then, Silver Creek Estates did not exist. Just cedar trees, muddy roads, and engineers standing knee-deep in runoff water trying to redesign drainage systems before the next storm season hit. I spent 11 years working county water infrastructure before retiring after my wife Diane got sick. Most people forgot that. Eventually, Vanessa definitely did. To her, I was just the stubborn old guy refusing to sell shoreline rights so the HOA could fully privatize the reservoir district. She never understood the reservoir only existed because someone manually controlled the retention gates beneath the southern dam structure. And the county never transferred permanent water rights away from the Mercer family easement attached to my property. Around 6:15, another black SUV rolled onto the shoreline access road carrying county investors dressed like they expected champagne and ribbon-cutting photos beside sparkling water. Instead, they stepped out into the smell of exposed mud and dying algae while stranded paddle boats sat tipped sideways beneath half-finished luxury banners reading "Welcome to Silver Creek Waterfront Living." One of the investors actually asked where the lake went. Vanessa looked seconds away from collapsing. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Then I remembered the fences her HOA installed last month blocking local families from fishing areas they used freely for decades. I remembered the cease and desist letters demanding I remove historical reservoir markers because they negatively impacted luxury branding. I remembered Vanessa standing at the last HOA meeting proudly announcing the lake now belonged to Silver Creek Estates. That part made me smile into my coffee thermos while morning fog drifted slowly across 30 acres of exposed reservoir floor below us. Because what Vanessa Whitmore never bothered learning was simple. The lake was never permanent. It only stayed full because I allowed the floodgates beneath the dam to remain closed. By 7 in the morning, Silver Creek Estates looked like a luxury resort built beside the bottom of an empty swamp. The panic spread fast once county guests started arriving in pressed suits and expensive sunglasses, expecting ribbon-cutting photos beside sparkling water instead of 30 acres of exposed mud stretching across the valley floor. Workers scrambled around the shoreline, trying to move decorative signs away from the stranded docks, while HOA staff whispered frantically into phones near the event tents. None of it helped. You cannot hide an entire missing lake with flower arrangements and luxury banners. I sat on my porch watching everything unfold while steam drifted from my coffee thermos into the cool morning air. The old cedar boards beneath my boots still held last night's moisture, and somewhere below the ridge a generator hummed beside the abandoned grand opening stage. The smell coming off the drained reservoir grew stronger as the sun climbed higher. Wet clay, rotting weeds, exposed algae baked under fresh heat. Most Silver Creek residents had never smelled a real reservoir basin before because they moved there after the valley became a luxury development. To them, the lake always existed. Permanent, decorative, safe. But I remembered what the land looked like before the water arrived. Before the mansions. Before the boardwalks and wine festivals and real estate brochures calling the reservoir a private waterfront paradise. Back then, the valley flooded every spring hard enough to wipe out county roads for weeks. I spent most of my 30s knee-deep in drainage runoff helping redesign flood channels and retention systems after 3 major storm seasons nearly bankrupted the county. The reservoir was never natural. That was the part Vanessa Whitmore never understood. Silver Creek Lake existed because engineers forced water to stay where nature originally never intended it to remain permanently. The reservoir depended entirely on a series of controlled retention gates hidden beneath the southern dam structure almost half a mile from the luxury shoreline district. Most people forgot those gates even existed. Vanessa definitely did. She treated the water like landscaping, like something the HOA simply owned because expensive homes surrounded it. Around 7:30, my daughter Claire pulled into the gravel driveway in her old blue Tacoma carrying a cardboard tray of breakfast sandwiches from town. The second she stepped out and saw the empty basin behind the house, she froze. "Dad," she said slowly, "please tell me you did not actually." I took a sip of coffee and looked toward the exposed shoreline where county investors were currently standing ankle-deep in. Mud beside a decorative fountain, no longer connected to anything useful. "Everything done legally," I answered calmly. Claire laughed despite herself before shaking her head. "Vanessa is going to lose her mind." Already started. Claire had never liked the Silver Creek HOA either. Mostly because Vanessa spent the last 2 years trying to erase every reminder that local families existed around the reservoir before luxury developers arrived. The HOA removed old fishing access signs, restricted shoreline parking, installed decorative fences around public walking paths. Last month, they even tried renaming Mercer Spillway Road because Vanessa thought the name sounded too industrial for the luxury branding campaign. That one almost made me laugh out loud during the county hearing. Mercer Spillway was literally named after my grandfather, who donated the original easement land allowing the reservoir system to exist in the first place. Funny how rich people love history until it interferes with their marketing strategy. Claire handed me a breakfast sandwich while watching HOA staff panic across the valley below us. "You think they finally understand the lake is controlled?" she asked quietly. "Not yet. And that was true. Most people still believed some kind of accident caused the water loss overnight. A leak, structural failure, emergency drainage malfunction. Vanessa definitely wanted everybody believing that version. I could see her pacing near the event tents, waving her arms dramatically while speaking to county officials beside the shoreline. But eventually somebody would ask the important question: who actually controls the floodgate release authorization beneath the Southern Retention Dam? And once county records answered that question, the entire Silver Creek illusion would start collapsing fast. Around 8 o'clock, a convoy of county utility trucks rolled down the maintenance road leading toward the southern spillway access point. That got my attention immediately. So did the expression on Vanessa's face when she noticed them too. Pure panic now. No more polished HOA confidence. The woman looked like somebody watching a luxury yacht sink in slow motion. Claire followed my gaze toward the utility trucks. County inspectors? Probably. That bad. I nodded once toward the exposed reservoir basin below us. The HOA built half those luxury docks inside restricted environmental zones after removing historical shoreline markers. Claire whistled softly under her breath. So once inspectors start reviewing permits, they are going to discover the lake was never classified for permanent private recreational expansion. Silence settled between us while sunlight reflected off muddy water channels still draining slowly toward the southern spillway system. The sound was faint from this distance. Soft rushing water moving through concrete release tunnels beneath the valley. Most people around Silver Creek never noticed those sounds before because the reservoir usually stayed full enough to hide them completely. But I noticed. I always noticed. I helped design them. Down near the event tents, county guests began leaving already while frustrated real estate agents tried desperately to salvage conversations beside stranded paddle boats and sinking decorative banners. One investor pointed directly toward the empty basin while shouting at Vanessa loud enough that nearby homeowners turned to stare. Good. Let them stare. The lake breeze carried mud smell and embarrassment equally well across the valley. Then Claire spotted something farther down the maintenance road and lowered her voice immediately. Dad company. I looked up just as Vanessa Whitmore's white luxury SUV turned sharply toward my property through a cloud of gravel dust. And judging by how fast she was driving toward the cabin, I had a feeling the HOA president finally realized somebody living beside the old floodgate road might know exactly where her lake disappeared overnight. Vanessa Whitmore slammed the brakes so hard outside my cabin that gravel sprayed across the old maintenance road like buckshot. Her white SUV stopped crooked beside Claire's truck while the engine kept running and luxury event badges swung wildly from the rearview mirror. She climbed out still wearing the same white trench coat from the shoreline ceremony, except now the bottom half looked stained with reservoir mud and panic sweat darkened the fabric beneath her arms. Nothing destroys polished suburban confidence faster than nature refusing to cooperate with branding plans. Claire leaned against the porch railing, quietly eating half a breakfast sandwich while I stayed seated beside the thermos watching Vanessa storm toward the cabin like somebody expecting answers she had no legal right to demand. Behind her, the drained reservoir stretched across the valley floor under full morning sunlight now, exposing rusted tree stumps, old creek channels, and muddy ridges hidden underwater for decades. The sight unsettled people, especially wealthy people who preferred the illusion of permanent beauty over reminders that land existed long before luxury developments arrived. Vanessa stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, breathing hard. What did you do? No greeting. No pretending anymore. Just raw panic. I took another sip of coffee before answering. Morning, Vanessa. Do not play games with me right now. Claire almost laughed into her sandwich. Vanessa pointed wildly toward the empty basin below us where county utility crews moved along the exposed shoreline beside stranded docks and tilted pontoon boats. The reservoir drained overnight. The county investors are furious. The grand opening is destroyed. Nobody can explain what happened. Actually, I said calmly, I can explain it pretty clearly. Silence hit immediately after that. Even the breeze seemed quieter for a second. Vanessa stared at me like somebody finally putting together pieces she desperately wished did not fit. You caused this, she whispered. Not accusation anymore. Realization. I looked toward the valley where sunlight reflected off thin streams of water still draining slowly through the southern spillway channels. The retention gates were legally opened for controlled release. Vanessa climbed halfway up the porch steps before stopping herself. You cannot just drain a county reservoir whenever you feel like it. Good thing I did not. Claire set down her coffee and folded her arms, watching the conversation carefully. Smart kid. She already knew Vanessa walked into a fight she fundamentally did not understand. The HOA president kept trying to process the situation through the lens of suburban politics and public relations when the real issue involved infrastructure law, environmental easements, and county water rights older than her entire development project. The lake belongs to Silver Creek Estates, Vanessa snapped finally. That almost made me smile again. People reveal everything through wording when panic starts taking over. I stood slowly from the porch chair and walked toward the railing overlooking the exposed reservoir basin below us. The mud flats stretched nearly half a mile across the valley now, while stranded luxury kayaks sat tipped sideways beside decorative stone pathways built far too close to the shoreline. County inspectors already moved through several sections taking photographs beside temporary hazard tape. Good. Let them document everything. Vanessa, I said quietly. The water exists on county-controlled retention land connected to the Mercer Flood Easement District. She shook her head immediately. No. The HOA purchased full waterfront development rights. Development rights are not water rights. That stopped her cold. Behind us, the metal wind chime rattled softly beside the porch, while somewhere farther down the maintenance road a county utility truck reversed with a sharp electronic beep echoing across the valley. The smell of exposed algae and wet clay kept growing stronger under the rising heat. Vanessa looked physically smaller than she did yesterday. Less polished, less certain. Nobody ever mentioned flood easements during the project approvals, she said carefully now. Oh, there it was. Fear shifting into damage control. Somebody should have read the county environmental records more carefully, I answered. Claire finally stepped forward holding her empty coffee cup, especially before removing historical warning signs around the spillway district. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward her immediately. Those signs were outdated and damaged the luxury image of the community. No, Claire replied calmly. They warned people the reservoir depended on controlled retention systems. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, but another sound interrupted her. County utility sirens. 3 additional trucks rolled slowly down the shoreline access road below us, followed by a black county inspection SUV carrying environmental officers. The second Vanessa saw them, fresh panic crossed her face again. Why are environmental inspectors here? I looked toward the trucks quietly. Probably because somebody expanded luxury shoreline construction into protected runoff zones while removing reservoir boundary markers. Her expression collapsed further. Completely. Because she already knew the answer before asking. Silver Creek built several new floating event platforms and decorative boardwalk sections during the past year without fully updating county environmental review permits. Vanessa pushed those projects through aggressively before the grand opening because she wanted dramatic waterfront presentation areas for investors and local media. The problem was those platforms now sat fully exposed in the mud where county inspectors could finally measure exactly how far they extended beyond legal boundaries. One of the inspectors stepped out beside the shoreline carrying orange survey flags and rolled maps. Another immediately started photographing the exposed foundations beneath the luxury boardwalk. Vanessa stared at them in horror. Oh my God. Yeah. Claire muttered quietly beside me. That looks expensive. Vanessa turned back toward me desperately now. You need to close the floodgates immediately. I shook my head once. Controlled release schedules follow county environmental procedure once activated. Garrett, please. First time she used my actual name without sounding annoyed by it. Interesting. I watched the county crews moving across the exposed basin while sunlight reflected off pools of remaining water trapped between mud ridges below us. Birds already circled areas hidden underwater less than 12 hours earlier. Nature adapts fast once illusions disappear. The release will continue until the reservoir reaches minimum ecological retention level, I said calmly. Vanessa stared at me in disbelief. Do you understand what this is going to do to property values? There it was again. Always property values. Even now, while county investigators prepared to inspect potentially illegal shoreline expansion, Vanessa still thought the real tragedy involved luxury home pricing. I looked out across the valley where Silver Creek's beautiful private lake used to exist and answered honestly. I understand exactly what happens when people build expensive fantasies on infrastructure they never bothered understanding. Then one of the county environmental officers raised a hand from the shoreline below and shouted something toward the inspection team near the boardwalk. Seconds later, every inspector in the basin suddenly turned their attention toward a series of exposed concrete drainage tunnels hidden beneath the mud. And judging by the expression on Vanessa Whitmore's face, she finally realized the empty lake was only the beginning of her problems. The county inspectors reached the exposed drainage tunnels just after 9 in the morning, and that was the exact moment the Silver Creek disaster stopped being embarrassing and started becoming dangerous for the HOA. I watched from my porch while 3 environmental officers climbed carefully across the cracked mud basin, carrying survey flags and waterproof cases toward the concrete spillway openings hidden beneath the drained reservoir floor. For years, those tunnels stayed buried beneath 20 feet of water and decorative shoreline lighting, while luxury homeowners drank wine beside the boardwalk, pretending the reservoir was some natural mountain lake instead of a controlled flood retention system. Now the tunnels sat fully exposed under bright sunlight, like old bones rising from the ground. Vanessa Whitmore stood frozen beside my porch railing, watching the inspectors with both hands pressed against her temples, while county utility crews moved equipment across the basin below us. The smell of wet clay kept getting stronger as the morning heat climbed. Mud cracked beneath heavy truck tires while stranded docks groaned softly against tilted support posts no longer balanced by water. Everything about the valley sounded wrong without the lake. Hollow. Exposed. Honest. One of the county inspectors suddenly waved his arms toward the shoreline officers near the southern edge of the basin. Even from this distance, I could tell they found something important. Vanessa saw it too. "What are they looking at?" she asked quietly. Her voice sounded completely different now. Smaller somehow. Like somebody finally understanding the rules changed while they were busy pretending to control the game. I looked toward the exposed spillway tunnels where inspectors crouched near several concrete support columns now visible for the first time in years. Probably the unauthorized retaining wall extensions your contractors poured last spring. Vanessa turned sharply toward me. Those structures were approved by the HOA. Silence again. She already knew where this conversation was going. The county never approved permanent luxury construction inside the protected runoff corridor beneath the southern retention basin. Vanessa pushed those expansions through anyway because the new boardwalk and event platform made better promotional photos for investors touring Silver Creek estates. She cared about aesthetics, branding, exclusivity. The problem was flood infrastructure does not care about luxury marketing campaigns. Claire leaned quietly against the porch post, watching county crews below us. "How bad is it?" she asked softly. I studied the exposed basin carefully before answering. "Depends how much concrete they poured into the runoff channels." Vanessa's face lost more color after hearing that, because she knew exactly how much concrete went into those shoreline expansions. Decorative stone walls, luxury event terraces, reinforced viewing platforms extending almost 30 feet beyond the original environmental setback markers. Most residents thought the HOA simply upgraded the waterfront district. They never realized Silver Creek spent 2 years slowly building directly into controlled drainage territory protected under county retention law. A county environmental officer started climbing the maintenance path toward my cabin, carrying a yellow file folder under one arm. I recognized him immediately. Daniel Reeves, Senior County Water Systems Inspector. Good man. Serious man. The kind who notices details other people miss. Vanessa noticed him too and straightened immediately like she was preparing for damage control. Reeves reached the porch, breathing slightly hard from the climb, before looking past us toward the exposed reservoir basin below. "Well," he muttered quietly, "this is one way to force an inspection." I handed him a fresh bottle of water from the cooler beside the porch. "Morning, Daniel." He nodded once while taking the bottle. "Garrett." Then his eyes shifted toward Vanessa. "Mrs. Whitmore." Vanessa stepped forward immediately. "Inspector Reeves, there has obviously been some kind of infrastructure failure." "No," Reeves interrupted calmly. "There has been controlled release through a legally functioning spillway system." That landed hard. Vanessa blinked rapidly. "Then why did the reservoir drain this far?" Reeves opened the yellow file folder and removed several laminated maps showing runoff corridors beneath the southern basin. Because somebody restricted secondary retention flow areas with unauthorized shoreline construction. Silence swallowed the porch completely after that. Even the wind chime stopped moving for a second. Reeves pointed toward the exposed basin below us. The emergency release system compensated for pressure imbalance exactly like the original engineering models predicted. Claire crossed her arms slowly. Meaning the reservoir protected itself. Reeves nodded once. Meaning the infrastructure still works despite people building luxury event platforms where floodwater overflow channels were designed to operate. Vanessa looked physically sick now. Nobody told us the runoff corridors mattered after the waterfront redesign. Reeves studied her carefully before answering. The county warning signs explained it clearly before they disappeared. There it was. The signs again. The rusted metal markers Vanessa ordered removed because they looked too industrial beside luxury boardwalk photography. Those signs warned property owners that Silver Creek functioned as an active retention reservoir connected to seasonal flood control systems. Ignore the warnings long enough and eventually nature reminds people why infrastructure rules exist. Down below, another county inspector started measuring the exposed shoreline extensions with laser equipment while utility crews marked several concrete structures using bright orange hazard paint. Not good. The moment inspectors start spray painting infrastructure, legal paperwork follows fast. Vanessa noticed too. What happens now? She asked quietly. Reeves closed the folder slowly. The county reviews every shoreline modification approved during the Silver Creek expansion phase. And the lake? Reeves looked toward me briefly before answering. Water restoration depends on environmental clearance and removal of unauthorized runoff obstructions. Translation mattered. The reservoir would stay partially drained until the county finished investigating everything hidden beneath the waterline, which meant every luxury homeowner expecting sparkling waterfront views during peak summer season was about to stare directly at exposed mud and county hazard tape instead. Vanessa turned toward the basin below where stranded paddle boats sat crooked beside luxury event banners flapping uselessly in the wind. One of the banners finally tore loose from its frame completely and disappeared across the mud flats like a broken sail. Fitting. Reeves tucked the folder beneath one arm before speaking again. There is another issue. Nobody answered. We already knew nothing good followed those words anymore. Reeves pointed toward the exposed spillway tunnels. The inspectors discovered several buried utility conduits running beneath the unauthorized boardwalk extension. My stomach tightened slightly after hearing that. Utility conduits meant electrical systems. Pump controls. Possibly drainage overrides. Vanessa looked confused. What does that mean? Reeves stared at her for several long seconds before answering carefully. It means somebody modified protected reservoir infrastructure without county authorization. And judging by the silence that followed across the entire porch, Vanessa Whitmore finally realized the missing lake was no longer the biggest problem threatening Silver Creek estates. The county shut down the entire Silver Creek shoreline district before noon. That was when residents finally stopped treating the empty reservoir like some temporary inconvenience and started realizing their luxury community sat directly on top of a legal disaster. Yellow county hazard tape stretched across the boardwalk entrances while environmental officers moved through the exposed basin carrying clipboards, cameras, and survey poles. Every few minutes another section of shoreline construction received bright orange spray paint markings identifying unauthorized infrastructure. The site looked surreal against all the expensive decorative stone and polished lakefront architecture designed to impress wealthy buyers. Luxury wine bar. Closed. Floating event platform. Under investigation. Premium waterfront pavilion. Wrapped in county warning tape while mud cracked beneath the support beams. I stayed on my porch most of the afternoon, watching the unraveling happen slowly beneath bright summer sunlight, while the reservoir continued draining toward ecological retention level through the spillway tunnels below the southern ridge. The sound of moving water echoed faintly through the valley like distant traffic underground. Most Silver Creek residents never heard those tunnels before. They were hearing them now. Vanessa Whitmore remained near the shoreline inspection zone arguing with county officials almost nonstop, while real estate agents hurried through the neighborhood trying desperately to calm furious homeowners. Nobody looked calm anymore, though. Property owners stood in clusters beside golf carts and luxury SUVs staring at the exposed mud basin like people discovering a sinkhole beneath their own living rooms. Some residents already packed up kayaks and paddleboards from shoreline storage racks, while others photographed county notices taped beside the marina entrances. Fear spreads fast in wealthy neighborhoods once investment security starts looking unstable. Around 1:30, Claire returned from town carrying sandwiches and local newspapers already printing emergency online headlines about the Silver Creek Reservoir incident. She handed me a turkey sandwich before, sitting beside the porch railing watching county inspectors below us. The grocery store looked like a panic convention, she said. Everybody keeps asking if the lake is gone forever. I unwrapped the sandwich slowly while warm wind pushed the smell of mud and exposed vegetation across the ridge. People panic when they realize infrastructure controls their lifestyle more than money does. Claire nodded toward the basin. You think the county will really freeze the whole development? Before I answered, another Black County SUV climbed the maintenance road toward the cabin carrying somebody I had not seen in years. Ruth Ellison stepped out carefully wearing hiking boots, jeans, and a faded county environmental jacket older than half the Silver Creek mansions. Ruth spent 25 years fighting environmental abuse cases across the state before retiring. Sharpest legal mind I ever worked with during my county engineering years. If Ruth showed up personally, things were worse than most residents understood. She climbed onto the porch holding a thick stack of folders beneath one arm while studying the empty reservoir below us. Well, she muttered, looks like Silver Creek finally learned water does not care about homeowners associations. Claire smiled immediately and hugged her. Ruth handed me one of the folders without sitting down. You were right about the concealed conduits. I opened the folder and immediately saw county infrastructure diagrams overlaid with newer unauthorized construction plans. Somebody had routed private electrical and utility systems directly through protected spillway maintenance corridors beneath the luxury boardwalk expansion. My stomach tightened slightly reading the details. That is reckless, I muttered. Ruth nodded grimly. It gets worse. The HOA contractors sealed 2 emergency runoff bypass channels during the waterfront redesign phase. Claire looked confused. Why would they do that? Ruth pointed toward the luxury event platform sitting crooked in the exposed basin below us. Because the bypass channels ruined the symmetry of the boardwalk layout. There it was again. Aesthetic obsession. Vanessa Whitmore cared more about clean promotional photographs than flood infrastructure functioning correctly. Ruth flipped another page revealing county environmental citations already drafted by the inspection team. If heavy rainfall hit this valley while those bypass channels stayed blocked, the pressure buildup could have damaged half the southern retention system. I stared down toward the spillway tunnels, while warm afternoon sunlight reflected off remaining pools of water trapped between cracked mud ridges. I spent years helping design that system specifically to prevent catastrophic overflow pressure during major storms. And Silver Creek almost compromised the entire structure because somebody wanted prettier waterfront event photos. Claire exhaled slowly beside us. So draining the reservoir probably prevented a much bigger problem, Ruth answered carefully. Silence settled across the porch after that. The wind chime rattled softly overhead, while county utility trucks moved through the basin below us, carrying equipment toward the blocked runoff channels. One crew already started cutting apart sections of decorative retaining wall built directly over the emergency bypass system. Good. The walls never should have existed there in the first place. Down near the shoreline, Vanessa suddenly pointed toward my cabin while speaking angrily with 2 county officials beside the inspection zone. Even from this distance, I could tell she blamed me for everything happening. She was partially right. I did initiate the legal release sequence through the retention system, but only after discovering Silver Creek construction crews sealed protected runoff corridors and removed flood infrastructure markers without county authorization. The reservoir needed emergency decompression before seasonal storm pressure built against compromised drainage pathways. Vanessa still thought this story centered around embarrassment and property values. She had no idea how close her luxury waterfront expansion came to triggering actual infrastructure failure. Ruth watched Vanessa gesturing wildly below us and shook her head slowly. She still does not understand what kind of legal exposure this creates. No, I answered quietly. She does not. Around 3 o'clock, county inspectors finally uncovered the last blocked runoff tunnel beneath the southern boardwalk extension. The moment debris cleared from the concrete opening, a surge of trapped water burst through the channel hard enough to send mud spraying across the exposed basin floor. County workers jumped backward while trapped runoff roared through the tunnel system toward the spillway release gates below. Even from half a mile away, the sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Every resident near the shoreline stopped moving at the exact same moment, because suddenly the missing reservoir no longer looked like some mysterious accident. It looked exactly what it truly was. A controlled system barely correcting itself before somebody's luxury fantasy overloaded it completely. Ruth closed the inspection folder slowly while watching county crews mark additional structures for removal. "Garrett," she said quietly, "once the county hearing starts tomorrow, Silver Creek is going to have a very hard time pretending this was just an HOA misunderstanding." I looked out across the empty basin where expensive docks sat stranded in mud beneath torn grand opening banners fluttering uselessly in the wind. "Good," I answered calmly, because nature already finished explaining it better than I ever could. The county hearing started at 6 o'clock the next evening inside the Silver Creek clubhouse, but the real meeting began long before anybody sat down. You could feel the fear the second you walked through the doors. Residents crowded the marble lobby holding printed county notices and reassessment estimates, while real estate agents whispered urgently beside indoor fountains that suddenly sounded much louder than usual. Outside the giant clubhouse windows, the reservoir basin still sat mostly empty beneath floodlights and yellow hazard tape. Exposed mud stretched across the valley like a scar cutting directly through the luxury image Silver Creek spent years trying to sell. The smell drifting through the open terrace doors carried wet clay, algae, and expensive panic. I arrived quietly with Claire and Ruth just before sunset, carrying a leather folder full of original county infrastructure records. Nobody ignored me anymore. Funny how quickly people start respecting the quiet man beside the maintenance road once they realize he understands the system keeping their property values alive. Conversation stopped as we crossed the ballroom toward the front rows where county officials already prepared stacks of environmental reports beneath bright overhead lights. Vanessa Whitmore stood near the HOA board table wearing a dark blue blazer instead of her usual white luxury event outfits. Smart choice. Harder to project perfection after the lake literally disappeared beneath your grand opening ceremony. Still, she looked exhausted. Makeup covering stress only works for so long once county investigators start uncovering buried infrastructure violations. Around the room, Silver Creek residents filled nearly every chair while additional county inspectors lined the walls beside projector screens showing aerial images of the drained reservoir basin. Every exposed runoff tunnel, illegal retaining wall, and unauthorized boardwalk extension glowed across the screens in sharp detail. Nobody whispered anymore after seeing those photographs. The evidence looked too obvious, too ugly. County Commissioner Daniel Reeves stepped to the front first while the room settled into nervous silence, broken only by air conditioning humming through the ballroom vents. This emergency hearing concerns unauthorized modifications to protected flood retention infrastructure within the Silver Creek Reservoir District, he announced calmly. No dramatic voice, no anger, just facts. Real authority usually sounds boring right before it destroys somebody's career. Reeves activated the projector and aerial drone footage filled the screen, showing the empty basin from above. Residents shifted uncomfortably seeing the exposed valley from that angle. The luxury waterfront looked completely different without water hiding the truth beneath it. Concrete runoff tunnels, buried drainage corridors, maintenance gates, emergency bypass systems, infrastructure everywhere. The reservoir suddenly looked exactly what it always was. A working flood control system pretending to be a luxury lake. Reeves pointed toward the southern basin expansion area where Silver Creek constructed its newest waterfront district. County investigators confirmed multiple unauthorized obstructions built directly over emergency runoff pathways. The screen zoomed closer, revealing decorative stone walls and reinforced event terraces blocking channels clearly marked on original county engineering maps. Vanessa stared at the screen without blinking. She already knew what came next. Reeves continued calmly. During seasonal overflow conditions, these modifications could have compromised pressure distribution across the retention system. A resident near the back raised his hand immediately. Are you saying the dam could have failed? Reeves shook his head carefully. The emergency release system functioned correctly before catastrophic pressure buildup occurred. Silence hit hard after that, because everybody understood the translation. The lake did not disappear because of sabotage. It disappeared because the infrastructure protected itself before the HOA expansion damaged something much worse. Ruth leaned slightly toward Claire beside me. Now they are finally listening. She was right. Earlier this week, Silver Creek homeowners cared about luxury branding and waterfront exclusivity. Tonight they cared about whether their million-dollar homes nearly sat beside a compromised flood system. Vanessa stood slowly from the HOA table, trying one final time to regain control. The board acted in good faith based on contractor recommendations and development consultations. Wrong answer. Reeves immediately displayed another document across the projector screen. An internal HOA approval memo signed directly by Vanessa authorizing removal of obsolete industrial warning signage negatively impacting shoreline presentation. Claire actually laughed quietly beside me. Because there it was. Proof. Vanessa removed the flood infrastructure markers specifically because they looked unattractive beside luxury waterfront photography. Several residents turned toward her instantly after reading the memo. You removed county warning signs. You told us the reservoir was fully recreational. You approved construction over flood channels? Every question chipped away more authority. Vanessa opened her mouth twice before finally answering. We were modernizing the district. One older homeowner stood up immediately holding a reassessment notice and shaking hands. Modernizing? My taxes could triple because you wanted prettier boardwalk photos. More voices joined after that. Angry voices now. Real ones. The illusion collapsed completely inside that ballroom. Silver Creek residents finally understood their luxury community depended on invisible infrastructure most of them never respected until it stopped working the way they expected. Reeves raised one hand for silence before turning toward me. Mr. Mercer, as former county water systems engineer attached to the original retention project, do you wish to clarify the emergency release decision? Every eye in the room shifted toward me instantly. I stood slowly while the exposed basin glowed beneath floodlights outside the windows behind us. The release sequence followed legal environmental procedure after county runoff pathways became obstructed, I answered calmly. The reservoir was never designed to support permanent luxury shoreline construction inside protected drainage corridors. Silence again. Heavy silence. Because unlike Vanessa, I did not sound defensive. Just factual. Honest. A resident near the front finally asked the question everybody feared most. Can the lake come back? I looked toward the dark basin outside before answering carefully. The water can return once the infrastructure functions safely again. Hope moved through the room after that. Small but visible. Then Reeves delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, Silver Creek waterfront development operations are suspended pending full environmental restructuring and legal review. Vanessa sat down slowly after hearing those words. Finished. Completely finished. The queen of the private lake now looked like somebody watching an expensive dream sink into exposed mud beneath county floodlights. And outside, beyond the clubhouse windows, the reservoir waited quietly in. The darkness, like nature itself, had decided it was finally tired of pretending the water belonged to anybody at all. The morning after the county hearing, Silver Creek looked like a neighborhood waiting for evacuation orders. Nobody jogged along the shoreline paths anymore. Nobody sat beside the marina drinking coffee pretending life was normal. The luxury lake community built its entire identity around water, and now the empty basin sitting beneath the ridge looked like a public reminder that money cannot negotiate with infrastructure. County floodlights still glowed across the exposed mud flats before sunrise while utility crews moved through the basin, removing unauthorized concrete barriers one section at a time. From my porch, I could hear metal saws cutting through decorative retaining walls the HOA once advertised as exclusive waterfront enhancements. Funny how quickly luxury upgrades become evidence once inspectors arrive. The air smelled different too. Cleaner somehow. Less perfume and landscaping chemicals. More cedar, wet clay, and river water moving naturally through the reopened runoff channels. Claire noticed it first while handing me fresh coffee before dawn. "The valley sounds alive again," she said quietly. She was right. Birds returned overnight to the exposed shallows. Frogs echoed through the drainage channels. Even the creek beneath the southern spillway sounded stronger now that blocked runoff corridors finally flowed correctly again. Nature started repairing itself faster than the HOA ever repaired anything. Around 7 in the morning, county crews reopened one of the original bypass channels hidden for years beneath Silver Creek's decorative event terrace. The second water rushed through the concrete tunnel. A wave of trapped debris burst from the opening and spilled into the basin below. Branches, plastic piping, landscaping fabric, pieces of luxury boardwalk trim, years of shortcut construction hiding beneath polished waterfront branding. Daniel Reeves stood near the spillway with 2 environmental officers documenting everything while local reporters gathered beside the hazard tape snapping photographs. That was new. Media vans, satellite trucks, news crews. Silver Creek finally became public enough for the county to stop protecting its image quietly. Vanessa Whitmore hated that part most of all. I saw her standing near the marina entrance around mid-morning wearing oversized sunglasses and speaking angrily with a lawyer beside the county barricades. Nobody crowded around her anymore. No homeowners asking for advice. No board members standing nearby pretending confidence. She looked isolated, smaller, like somebody discovering leadership disappears the second consequences arrive. Claire leaned against the porch railing beside me watching reporters film the exposed basin. "Think she finally understands?" she asked softly. I took a slow sip of coffee while morning wind rolled through the pine trees surrounding the cabin. "No," I answered honestly. "People like Vanessa do not understand systems. They only understand appearances." Down near the shoreline, county inspectors removed another section of decorative stone installed directly over the emergency runoff corridor. Water immediately surged through the reopened channel hard enough to cut fresh paths across the mud basin below. Reporters turned their cameras toward it instantly. Good. Let the cameras record reality for once instead of luxury brochures and staged waterfront parties. Around noon, Ruth arrived carrying updated county filings and reassessment notices already circulating among Silver Creek residents. She climbed onto the porch without saying much at first, just standing beside us watching the valley below while warm sunlight reflected across the remaining pools of water trapped inside the basin. "The board is collapsing," she finally said. 3 HOA directors resigned this morning. Claire raised her eyebrows. "Already?" Ruth nodded once. County subpoena requests tend to change people's loyalty pretty fast. That made sense. The environmental investigation uncovered more than unauthorized runoff obstructions now. Buried utility conduits, unreported shoreline modifications, private contractor agreements bypassing county review procedures. Every hour exposed more evidence showing Silver Creek leadership cared more about creating the illusion of a private luxury lake than respecting the infrastructure keeping the reservoir safe. Ruth handed me one of the county notices. Temporary suspension of Shoreline Development Authority. Across the valley below, workers already started removing sections of the HOA Boardwalk extension using heavy equipment while residents stood behind barricades filming everything on phones. The same people who once applauded Vanessa during waterfront ribbon-cutting meetings now looked at her like a walking lawsuit. Funny reversal. Then Ruth pointed toward the marina parking area where several moving trucks sat beside luxury lake homes. "Some investors are already trying to sell." Claire laughed quietly. "Sell what exactly?" "Mudfront property." Even Ruth smiled at that. But beneath the humor sat something serious. Silver Creek sold exclusivity, prestige, permanent waterfront perfection. The second the lake disappeared, the illusion disappeared with it. Now residents had to confront something uncomfortable. They never owned nature. They rented stability from systems designed by people they ignored until those systems stopped cooperating. Around 1:30, Daniel Reeves walked up the maintenance road carrying another inspection folder beneath one arm. He looked exhausted. "County commissioners approved full restructuring review this morning," he said without wasting time. "Silver Creek HOA authority over shoreline operations is officially suspended." Claire whistled softly. "That fast?" Reeves looked back toward the exposed basin where reporters filmed county crews cutting apart decorative retaining walls. Once infrastructure risk entered the report, nobody wanted political responsibility for delaying action. Makes sense. Flood systems scare counties more than lawsuits ever will. Reeves handed me the inspection summary while wind pushed the smell of fresh-cut concrete dust across the ridge. You were right about the emergency release, he said quietly. Another 2 months of restricted runoff pressure, and the southern corridor could have failed during storm season. I stared down toward the reopened bypass channels below us, where water finally flowed. Correctly again beneath exposed concrete arches hidden underwater for years. That part stayed with me. Infrastructure always tells the truth eventually. You can hide flood tunnels beneath luxury boardwalks. Cover warning signs with landscaping stone. Pretend retention systems are decorative lakes instead of engineered safety zones. But pressure never disappears. It waits. Then nature collects every unpaid debt at once. Reeves looked toward Vanessa, standing alone near the barricades beside 2 silent lawyers. She still wants to blame you publicly. I shrugged once. That is easier than admitting the reservoir protected itself from her decisions. Silence settled across the porch while reporters continued filming the exposed basin below. Somewhere near the spillway, another section of blocked runoff finally cleared, and a fresh stream of water roared through the concrete tunnel strong enough to echo across the valley. The sound rolled through Silver Creek like a warning nobody could ignore anymore. And for the first time since the grand opening disaster started, several residents standing near the shoreline actually applauded when the water broke free. 3 days after the reservoir drained, Silver Creek stopped looking like a luxury waterfront community entirely. It looked like an active county investigation site. Floodlights stayed on through the night across the exposed basin, while heavy equipment crawled through the mud, removing illegal retaining walls and dismantling sections of decorative shoreline construction one concrete slab at a time. County barricades blocked most waterfront roads now, and residents needed temporary access permits just to reach certain sections of the neighborhood. The giant stone entry sign reading Silver Creek Waterfront Estates suddenly looked ridiculous sitting above a half-empty basin filled with exposed runoff tunnels and construction debris. Every illusion eventually becomes comedy once reality arrives. I stood beside the old maintenance fence before sunrise watching mist drift low across the reopened drainage channels while the spillway system hummed quietly beneath the southern ridge. The reservoir had stabilized. Overnight at ecological retention level, leaving enough water in the deeper sections for environmental recovery while keeping the exposed infrastructure accessible for county repairs. Birds filled the valley again. Herons stalked through shallow water pools near the old creek bed, while frogs echoed through marsh grass, returning faster than anyone expected. Nature wastes very little time reclaiming space once people stop trying to control appearances. Claire joined me carrying coffee while county crews prepared another round of structural inspections below us. "You see the news this morning?" she asked. I shook my head. She handed me her phone. Silver Creek HOA under formal fraud investigation. Smaller headlines underneath mentioned environmental negligence, concealed infrastructure modifications, and investor misrepresentation claims. Vanessa Whitmore's photograph sat beside the article wearing the same polished smile she used for every waterfront advertisement campaign. Strange seeing confidence frozen permanently in a photograph while the real person unraveled in real time outside. Around 8:30, Daniel Reeves arrived with 2 county attorneys and several engineering consultants carrying updated basin maps across the maintenance road toward the spillway district. The entire valley buzzed with activity now. Concrete saws cutting through unauthorized structures. Utility pumps redirecting runoff flow. Survey drones crossing overhead. Silver Creek spent years hiding the reality beneath the waterline. Now the county exposed every inch of it publicly. Reeves climbed the ridge toward us holding another inspection folder. "Morning, Garrett." He looked exhausted again. Nobody sleeps much once county lawyers start circling infrastructure cases. Claire noticed the thick stack of documents immediately. More problems. Reeves exhaled slowly while looking toward the exposed basin below us. We discovered additional contractor payments routed through private HOA accounts tied directly to shoreline modifications. My jaw tightened slightly, meaning Vanessa approved the runoff obstructions knowingly. Reeves nodded once. Looks that way. Silence settled for a moment, while morning sunlight spread across the mud flats below. Workers in reflective vests moved like ants across the basin, dismantling sections of decorative boardwalk, now marked as illegal infrastructure interference. Reeves opened the folder and handed me several aerial photographs taken during the previous night's drone survey. Even I felt unsettled looking at them. The unauthorized construction extended farther into the protected runoff corridors than anyone originally estimated. Luxury terraces, buried electrical conduits, reinforced concrete barriers redirecting natural overflow pathways to create cleaner waterfront symmetry for investors touring the development. Claire stared at the photographs quietly. She really thought nobody would notice. Reeves almost laughed at that. People stop respecting infrastructure when it works too well. That part hit harder than most residents understood. Flood systems only become visible after disaster starts. Until then, wealthy communities treat them like invisible servants quietly protecting property values behind landscaping and decorative stone. Vanessa wanted the reservoir to behave like a private decorative lake because acknowledging the engineering underneath ruined the luxury fantasy she sold to buyers. Around midday, the county hosted a public inspection walk through the exposed shoreline district, allowing residents and media crews to see the damage firsthand. Hundreds showed up. Homeowners, investors, reporters, curious residents from nearby towns. People lined the temporary pathways beside the basin, staring down at exposed flood tunnels and demolished retaining walls, while county engineers explained how runoff systems actually functioned beneath the development. I stayed near the spillway access point, answering occasional questions from inspectors and reporters who finally realized the quiet old engineer beside the maintenance road knew more about Silver Creek than the entire HOA board combined. One local reporter asked if I regretted triggering the emergency release sequence. I looked toward the valley where county crews removed another illegal concrete obstruction from the runoff corridor. The second it came, free, trapped water surged naturally through the channel exactly how the original system intended. No, I answered calmly. I regret waiting as long as I did. That quote spread across every local news station before sunset. Vanessa probably hated that. By evening, residents gathered along the ridge watching county crews reopen the final blocked bypass channel beneath the old luxury event platform. Floodlights reflected across shallow water, while heavy equipment pulled apart reinforced concrete walls the HOA once advertised as exclusive shoreline enhancements. The second the final barrier cracked apart, water rushed through the restored runoff path with enough force to echo across the valley like distant thunder. People actually applauded again. Not politely either. Real applause. Because for the first time since the disaster started, residents finally understood what the county engineers tried explaining all week. The reservoir was never failing. It was recovering. Vanessa stood far behind the crowd, near the marina parking lot beside two silent attorneys, while residents openly ignored her presence. No more suburban queen energy. No more polished confidence controlling waterfront meetings. Just a woman watching the expensive fantasy she built collapse under county floodlights, while nature corrected every shortcut she tried hiding beneath the waterline. Claire leaned beside me quietly as the reopened runoff channel carried fresh water through the basin toward the spillway gates below. "Do you think the lake will ever look the same again?" she asked softly. I watched moonlight reflecting across the restored flow corridors where trapped water finally moved freely through the valley once more. "No," I answered honestly. And that might be the healthiest thing that ever happened here. 6 weeks later, water returned to the valley slowly enough that most people barely noticed the exact moment Silver Creek stopped looking broken and started looking honest again. The county never rushed the refill process. That was the important difference. No luxury reopening ceremony. No staged ribbon cutting beside sparkling docks. Just controlled restoration through repaired runoff channels and fully reopened bypass systems functioning the way they were originally designed decades earlier. Every few days the waterline climbed another few inches higher against the exposed shoreline markers, while fresh grass pushed through sections of cracked mud that sat underwater for years. The reservoir sounded healthier too. Natural. Water moved constantly now through the restored channels instead of sitting trapped beneath decorative concrete, and blocked spillways built for aesthetics instead of safety. I noticed the difference most during sunrise. The old creek beneath the southern ridge finally sounded alive again, while mist rolled naturally across the waterline without fighting against pressure restrictions buried beneath luxury construction. County crews finished removing the last unauthorized shoreline platform at the beginning of August. After that, Silver Creek felt quieter. Humbled. Most of the giant waterfront event banners disappeared weeks earlier along with the luxury marketing signs advertising exclusive private lake living. Funny how quickly words like exclusive vanish once legal paperwork starts attaching consequences to them. The HOA itself barely existed anymore. County restructuring dissolved the original board entirely after investigators uncovered hidden contractor payments, falsified environmental disclosures, and private development approvals bypassing county oversight. Vanessa Whitmore resigned publicly 3 days before formal charges reached the county review committee. I heard she moved out of Silver Creek before summer ended. Nobody seemed interested in organizing a farewell party. Claire visited almost every weekend while restoration crews finished stabilizing the shoreline. One Saturday morning, she sat beside me on the dock holding a fishing rod while the rebuilt runoff channels carried fresh water quietly beneath the boardwalk bridges now redesigned under county supervision. "You know," she said while adjusting her line, "this place actually looks better without all the fake luxury stuff." She was right. The valley breathed easier now. Fewer decorative lights. Fewer giant event platforms crowding the shoreline. More open water. More reeds growing naturally along the retention edges where county ecologists restored the original runoff vegetation. Even the residents seemed different. Slower somehow. Less obsessed with appearances. People waved more often now, while walking the shoreline paths reopened under county access protections. Families fished again near the eastern bank where the HOA once tried restricting local access for premium waterfront experiences. The funniest part was watching wealthy homeowners suddenly become extremely interested in flood infrastructure. Residents attended county maintenance meetings now, asked questions about runoff pressure and retention systems, read environmental notices carefully. Amazing what happens after people watch an entire luxury fantasy disappear overnight, because nobody respected the engineering underneath it. Around late afternoon, Daniel Reeves stopped by the cabin carrying the final county restructuring report beneath one arm. He looked less exhausted than usual for the first time in weeks. "Thought you might want a copy," he said while handing me the folder. "Final shoreline compliance resolution. Official. Finished." Reeves sat beside me on the dock while sunlight reflected across calm water stretching through the restored basin. County commissioners approved permanent preservation status for the Mercer Retention District this morning, he said quietly. No future shoreline modifications without direct environmental review. Good. That should have existed years ago. Reeves looked across the water toward the rebuilt boardwalks where children rode bicycles beneath restored warning signs the HOA once removed because they looked too industrial. Those signs stayed now. Bright yellow. Impossible to ignore. Funny thing, Reeves muttered. Residents are actually thanking the county for protecting the runoff system now. I almost laughed. Fear educates people fast. Silence settled comfortably between us while evening wind moved softly across the reservoir. The lake reflected gold beneath the setting sun while fish disturbed the surface near the reeds growing back along the eastern retention bank. Peaceful again. Real peace. This time, not the polished artificial quiet Silver Creek tried selling through luxury branding campaigns and exclusive waterfront parties. Actual balance. Claire stepped onto the dock carrying 3 fresh coffees, while county maintenance crews packed equipment onto trailers near the southern spillway road for the last time. Looks weird without all the construction noise, she said. Reeves smiled slightly while taking the coffee. That means the system works again. We sat there together watching the reservoir settle into evening light while herons crossed low above the restored waterline. Somewhere farther across the valley, a child laughed near the public fishing pier reopened under county access protection. No gated luxury restrictions anymore. No fake private shoreline nonsense. Just water moving the way it was supposed to move. After a while, Reeves stood and brushed dust from his jeans before heading back toward the maintenance road. You know, he said quietly before leaving, most people around here still think you drained the lake out of revenge. I looked out across the calm reservoir reflecting sunset colors beneath slow-moving clouds. People can believe whatever story helps them sleep. Reeves nodded once and walked away. Claire leaned beside me against the old dock railing while crickets started echoing through the reeds surrounding the shoreline. "So why did you really do it?" she asked softly. I watched water flowing gently through the restored runoff channels beneath the southern ridge where the spillway gates remained partially visible again behind the warning signs Vanessa once tried erasing from the valley. "Because," I answered quietly, "the reservoir was protecting itself long before anyone else realized it needed to." The wind moved softly across the water after that, carrying cedar smell and fresh runoff through the evening air while the restored lake settled peacefully into the dark. And for the first time in years, Silver Creek finally understood something simple. The water never belonged to the HOA. The HOA only borrowed the illusion until the infrastructure decided it was time to remind everybody who truly controlled the valley beneath. Their homes,